Hey, Through Crosses family, welcome back to the podcast. My name is Pastor AJ. I oversee life groups and discipleship. And today we are entering back into our 1 Corinthians series, talking about generosity. We're talking about life-giving generosity out of 1 Corinthians 16. And so we're going to be in that conversation in just a few moments. But before we get into that conversation, we wanted to talk to you about things happening at Three Crosses. And so next Sunday, August 3rd, we have our monthly Next Steps class. And so if you haven't gone to the Next Steps class, we'd love for you to come check it out. It's a great place to learn about Three Crosses and learn how to take your tangible next step into the ministry here going on in the East Bay area. And so you can learn more information about the Next Steps class at threecrosses.church/nextsteps. We'd also love for you to fill out our podcast survey. Tell us who you are, where you're listening. We love to minister to you. We were just talking offline about how many people have come up to us and talked to us about the podcast. We love having those conversations. Keep them coming. Fill out that podcast, threecrosses.church/podcast, and you can redeem a free drink at Neighborhood Coffee. And so we got a great conversation in store for you about generosity. And so with that, let's go deeper. Joining us to bring it back to 1 Corinthians. Pastor Danny, here we are back in 1 Corinthians after a little bit of a gap there.
A little gap. We had to cover some topics that are real themes in Corinthians, the afterlife and the Holy Spirit, just to make sure we gave them adequate time. And now we're back to close out the book for 2 weeks in chapter 16.
Chapter 16, here we go. I love that we're spending time focusing because so often in Paul's letters, you can get to the end and you're like, it's just greetings and
it's
and
all
so forth.
like the other stuff.
Yeah. So if you're following along at home, 1 Corinthians 16 verses 1 through 9 is our text. And so we'll just jump right in. Now about the collection for the Lord's people. That's the opening remarks of chapter 16. And it reminds me of all the problems that Paul has brought up to this point. And so I have a list of all the problems that Paul has addressed. And so we begin with the problem of following different people. I follow Paul. I follow Apollos. I follow Peter. We talked about the role of leaders in the church. We talked about philosophical influences in the culture. We talked about status and success in the world. We even talked about a man sleeping with his stepmother. We talked about lawsuits among believers. We talked about sexual immorality. We talked about relationship stations. We talked about wisdom in gray areas like food sacrificed to idols. We talked about God's provision as a minister. We talked about ongoing discipleship. We talked about women and men in ministry. We talked about the Lord's Supper. We talked about spiritual gifts. We talked about this disregard and ignorance toward basic theological truths like the resurrection. And now we end it with money, which makes me feel a type of way, right? He could have ended the book with any one of these topics, but he decides to land it on money. And so I want to open up with the skeptic question here, because I can imagine the skeptic saying, you know what? I knew it, Paul. What you were after this whole time, you were after doing all these things, addressing all these topics. And I knew this was just a money grab. And I can imagine people out there feeling the same way about their attendance to church. Like, oh, I knew they were going to ask for the pass the offering plate around. And so my question is, why end with money? Why decide out of all these problems, why decide to end this conversation in 1 Corinthians 16 with money?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why he ended with money, but I totally sense that tension there. I think that a lot of the commentators do good to point out that there's been so much conflict in this book, like that you just mentioned, that this has to be a bit of an eggshells type of conversation where we just talked about the fact, and he's even talked throughout the book about like, hey, I'm not trying to get money from you, and I never asked you for money, and I paid my own way. And now he's ending the book and saying, okay, so now can we talk about the money? I want to point out though, and I think a lot of times we miss this at church and we miss this in this passage, he's not asking for money for himself. He's, the collection for the Lord's people. He's asking for the ability to take some money to folks in need in another city. And if you read the passage through the lens of the tension, you see that he's actually being really cautious to kind of tiptoe around this topic with as much clarity as possible, to say, hey, there are folks in need in Jerusalem. I'm hoping you can put aside some money week over week after week so that when I come, I don't have to go to your house and ask you for money, but I do want to be able to give money to the poor. It's going to the poor. It's not going to him. then he says, we're going to send that money with some people that you choose, and I can go with them if you want, right? And so you can see there's a lot of respect for, I'm not taking the money. I'm not coming to your house asking for it. I'm not going to be the one to take it to Jerusalem. You're going to do that yourself. But, there's a need. There are people who are in need. They need food. They need basic provisions, I'm assuming. And these folks in Corinth have some excess resources, it seems. And so he's saying, hey, we're all one family. This is some of the family business stuff. And so the only answer I have to the why he's ending with it is we are in that section where we've kind of moved from the teaching of the book into kind of some of that practical, matters. Hey, say hi to this guy, say hi to that gal. Hey, just so you know, when I come, I'd love to collect some money to send to Jerusalem. Could you start preparing that? And I'm going to try to spend a winter with you guys, and I'd love a place to stay, And so, really, this is a normal thing. And so, same thing with church. It's like when we ask for resources, it's not like we pocket them. It's really we're asking for money because there are folks in need, or we're asking for money because there's this vision for the future that we really want to invest in ministry here in the East Bay. So that's the thing about being a church or being an apostle here with Paul. We don't get the money; we pass it on. And we're kind of the middleman of God's people giving to God's people or God's work. And so I can see that it's a tense conversation even for Paul, but it doesn't have to be, because he's trying to be abundantly clear. This is not money for Paul. This is money for folks in need in another city.
And if you go back into our episodes and even the sermons, you can kind of see how Paul is beginning to form the church community, the fellowship of believers. And that word fellowship comes up in the intro, 1 Corinthians 1, talking about you've been called into the fellowship with his son, Jesus Christ the Lord. And when I was walking through this passage, I was just interested in how that word fellowship gets used. And interestingly enough, fellowship gets used as like monetary contribution, that word koinonia in the scriptures. So Romans 15 talking about the contribution, it's the word koinonia. So it's very fascinating to see, like, as he's building the groundwork for drawing people and edifying the church, there's something really deeply rooted about money in this that like builds the koinonia, the fellowship.
And it's funny, you look at the original koinonia in the New Testament in Acts chapter 2 and chapter 4, and this idea that the believers were together, they had everything in common, they sold their possessions, gave to the poor, anyone who had need. Like, the way that you knew that they were a deeply rooted community is because they liquidated their assets to support one another. And I do think part of that is the context of the day, where in those days, having a savings account was frowned upon, having a retirement account was frowned upon in a sense. Really, the concept was, if you have more money than you need for your bread and your food and your roof over your head, you should give that to people in need, because there are people starving in our town here. And so we think of the island of Crete that has this bad reputation for being these lazy sluggards and gluttons and all of that. And when you do a little digging, you find out that the primary indictment against the Cretans was that even though they had more than enough resources for themselves, they didn't give it to the poor. Instead, they saved it or spent it on themselves. And so part of the sign of a person of character and a community of high regard is that when they have excess, they give to each other so that everyone has what they need.
Yeah. And we did talk about that in Corinthians, talking about like the judicial system where the rich were being favored because they were buying out all these things. And then even in communion, where there was an element of the people who were available to eat communion, presumably not working, were able to fill themselves, while the poor essentially were left out to dry with nothing to eat. So it's just really interesting how finances take a really critical role, not only here, but in the rest of scriptures too. Like Jesus talks about it all the time. So excited to get into this topic, because having gotten to know you for a while, it feels like this is a topic you're very passionate about personally, and I've learned a lot from you. So diving into finances, here we go. Now, about the collection for the Lord's people, do what I told the Galatian churches to do. So I want to stop there. We haven't gotten really far, but do what I told the Galatian churches to do. This is his opening remark as he's diving into finances. So what is the significance of making people realize that this is a church-wide practice? This isn't something that he's singling out the Corinthians for, but he's saying, hey, I'm asking other churches to do this. Kind of reminds me of the head coverings conversations too we had, of like, this is a tradition that all the churches do, and praise you for holding on to that tradition. So what do you think the significance is there as we start?
I mean, my guess would be that the primary reason he's bringing up the practices of the churches of Galatia is, again, to remind Corinth, hey, I'm not coming in at you. There's no target on your back. I'm not singling you out because you're rich or because I want your money. This is just a normal thing. I ask every church to do this. I'm going to come by. When I do, I'd love to pick up some cash that you can send to people in need. Like, that's just part of being Christians. And so part of it is to normalize the behavior, to show them they're connected, not just with the church at Jerusalem who has need, but they're connected with other churches who have excess or surplus or the ability to give. And so kind of weaving the whole church together, Jew and Gentile, throughout the ancient Near East. And then also, I think just as I read through this passage, and I know we will, I think I'm really struck with the simplicity of the advice that he gives these guys. And so it's like, this isn't rocket science either. It's like, hey, I just want you to do what I told everybody to do. It's real simple. Here it is. So that's how I read that sentence.
So you're saying that the conversation here is had at other churches as well. Like, this isn't only a Three Crosses thing, talking about finances. Oh,
this is the it's funny, through the ages and then every church, right? It's I'm sure you might be in our church on Sunday for the first time. Maybe this is your first time listening to the podcast and you're like, man, every time I go to a church, they're talking about money. It's like, it's not all we talk about. We actually rarely talk about money here at Three Crosses, but that is kind of this common thing of like, man, that's a delicate subject. Where our treasure is, our heart will be also. So part of it's like, you mentioned my passion for generosity and giving and stewardship. It's like, I've seen God do great things through generosity. I'm really passionate about it. I realize in our church, there are some folks who are fired up about giving because they've seen God do great work through giving. There are folks who are really hesitant, or they've been burned in the past, or they've never done it, or they're new to church, all these reasons. And that's what's real hard, is that in a conversation like a sermon, which isn't a conversation, it's a monologue, you've got people on both sides of that aisle. Some are like, oh, he wants our money. And other people are like, yes, I love this stuff. This changes lives. And so Paul's trying to, I assume, kind of wade through the weeds of all that.
So let's get practical, because he goes from this recommendation to see what the Galatian church is doing. This is not just for you guys, this is universal practice. And so here's the practice. Verse 2, on the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income, saving it up, so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. So it's kind of interesting working through this practical advice. On the first day of every week, that became an important time period for the early Christians, as it was the day that Christ rose. And so you see a lot of transitions in terms of worship style and practices there. This in keeping with your income, kind of an interesting phrase in the Greek. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say on that. And then, it just seems like this is a very interesting practice that he's promoting here. So what stood out to you in terms of practical kingdom financial planning that Paul is advocating here?
Yeah, I think the first thing that stuck out to me, I've heard this preached several times, just to like, okay, every time you come to church, bring some money, right? So it's like the first day of the week, which what stuck out to me is that's actually not what he's saying.
Interesting.
The first day of the week, he says, store up this money so that when I come, you'll have it in savings. And so he's not saying bring it to church every week, but he is saying on Sunday, on the Lord's day, you should transfer money from your checking account, so to speak, to your savings account for your generosity. And I thought that was really interesting. I think there's a reminder that giving is an act of worship. I think there's something too, right? We worship Jesus on Sunday because he rose from the dead. On Sunday, it's the first day of the week. It's the first day of the kingdom, the new resurrection life. We are beginning life with God. And I love that idea that as the week begins, there's this idea of we worship God on Sundays and we look back at the week that we just had. And he says that each of us should store away some money according to our income. I think that the better translation of that is something like according to your prosperity, which means you look back at the week that you just had, and did God bless you prosperously in any way last week? Did you sell some goods and get some money from it? Did you get a paycheck from an employer last week? Did you get an inheritance last week? Whatever it is, like, did prosperity enter into your life last week? Did funds enter into your bank account last week? Look back and rejoice. Like, this is a gift from God. And it's the Lord's day. It's his day. The first thing you should do as you're planning out this next week is, okay, before I decide, I got groceries, I got clothes to buy, I got all these things, I need to do this, do that. The first thing you decide is, let's set a portion aside for those who are in need, or let's set a portion aside for the Lord's work. What is God's portion, right? This idea of first fruits comes up throughout the entire Bible of when you receive income, the first part of it goes to God. This is like the first story after the Garden of Eden is a story of first fruits. The first fat part of your money, right? That's from the Cain and Abel story, belongs to God. And so he says, let's make that part of your worship. And it's not talking about writing a check and dropping it in the plate in this passage. He's talking about just making an intentional decision, how much of your income you're going to carve out for the Lord's work from the week that you just had. And then he says, store it up, right? I'm sure they didn't have savings accounts back then. So put it in a jar or whatever it is. And for us, it's like transfer to your savings or whatever, put it in a jar, whatever you do. And so that when it comes time to give it, you've got it. You know, it's like, I mean, it's like basic budgeting. But really what he's teaching is not basic budgeting. He's teaching how to incorporate generosity into your budgeting. And the principle he gives us is it should be regular, it should be first, and it should be an act of worship.
So two follow-up questions here, because I can imagine people saying, Pastor Danny, you should have seen my week last week. I did not have prosperity. Like it did not go well. I lost. So what do we do in that situation? And then two, what's the importance of doing that first? Because I know that there was a story that you had mentioned in sermon review that somebody had shifted their thinking to allotting money first through the month and then letting their month progress. So what's the significance about putting it first? And then what happens if you don't experience prosperity?
Yeah, I think part of it, if you don't experience prosperity, then it's like you have nothing, in a sense, to give to the Lord. And when I say prosperity, I don't mean you got rich, but if it's like, man, I'm laid off, I don't have any income. Like, of course, right? There are times I know people who have no income, and think of the widow's mite story in the New Testament where like, hey man, she gave out of her poverty, not out of her prosperity. So just because you don't have a job doesn't mean you can't give anything to the Lord. I'm not saying that, but I do think what Paul's drawing out is, and like what we see in this very passage is there are people who are in times of desperate need. They need money. And then there are those of us who have paychecks, have jobs, have income coming in. We can give money to those people. And so this is within the church family. He's talking about kind of caring for one another. And we do that through our benevolence fund here at the church. That's a portion of our giving as well. But yeah, I would say that, most often what I hear is people say, oh yeah, I'm not rich, I'm not going to give. He's not saying don't give until you're rich, not that type of prosperity. But really it's like, hey, if God's blessed you with $1, he's blessed you with $20, blessed you with $20,000, ask that question. Wow, this is awesome. This fell into my lap. Well, what does God want me to do with this in total? And specifically, what part of this does he want for his work? And so that's the prosperity connection is, there's going to be seasons where we're out of work. We don't have income. God's not saying like, well, hey, go take out a loan and write a check to the church or something. It's, there might be a season where you need to come to the church and say, hey, I need some help. I can't pay my bills. But it says for those of us who God has blessed us with resources this week, before we go out and do all this other stuff. And yet that's the flip side, right? So it's like, well, I got money, but like, I got to spend it on my rent. I got to spend it on my groceries. I got to spend it on my kids. I got to spend it on my clothes, right? None of us are like, well, I want to buy a Ferrari. It's really normal stuff when we have these conversations. And yet I told the story today of just somebody that was coaching folks with their finances. And they're like, man, we really want to give. We want to be generous. But the hard thing is we get to the end of the month, there's nothing left. And he's like, man, I just gave him the advice. I'm like, well, we'll try giving at the beginning of the month instead. And so, it's kind of a joke where it's like, well, you have money, then it's gone. But he said the crazy thing was they went out, they took his advice. They started giving generously at the beginning of the month. And they came back and they said, hey, we actually we always have enough. We have money left over. I don't know what happened, right? And so part of it is like there's a miracle in giving. Like there are some promises in scripture that when you honor me with your finances, I will provide for you. You're reminding yourself that I am your provider. There's also these concepts in scripture that those who are faithful with little be entrusted with more. So there are some prosperity concepts, not like you'll get rich if you follow Jesus, but when you trust God with your finances, he is faithful to provide. I also think that when we are faithful to God with our finances, it does change us. And so it's like, man, I'm writing this check to this person who needs it or to this ministry that needs it or whatever it is. And, I'm like, well, that means I can't afford to buy the coffee or, do this vacation the way I wanted to, or take my kids on this specific part of this thing or whatever. It's like, well, at some point those things kind of fade away because you're like, well, I like this better. I'd rather help these people and I don't need another pair of shoes or, whatever. So I do think it changes us too. I think there's a way that God provides for us when we trust him. And I think there's a way that he changes us as we trust him.
So far we've seen Paul's words with the intention. He doesn't want to come and he doesn't want to have a collection because he wants to look at the people's savings account and say, you have enough to give. And so
that's, by the way, that's every like church leader's dream.
That'd be awesome.
Right? It's like, there are times where churches do these vision campaigns. We've done them in the past. We'll do them in the future where it's like, man, we need to raise $7 million, right? Or $4 million to build the cafe space 15 years ago. And it's like, we always hope, okay, I really hope that people have been putting aside money. And when we tell them we have this vision that they've got it, because it's just no fun to like go to someone's house and be like, hey, I've got this vision. Would you be willing to participate? Like face to face is so awkward. And by the grace of God, in the history of our church, as far as I know, we've never been in a season where we've sat down face to face and asked people point blank for finances. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's part of churches and ministry. I think Paul's probably done that at times too, but he's like, he just feels very human where he's like, listen, I don't want to have to go to each of your houses and be like, hey, do you have any money for the collection? I would just love it that when I come, you've already saved some up and you bring it voluntarily. And I don't have this awkward conversation where it feels like I'm guilting you into giving. You decide, you drop it at the feet of these people we've chosen to bring it to Jerusalem. And that's the smoothest, most beautiful way to do it. I just feel for him because I know I've talked to a number of pastors who's like, man, I'm in this capital campaign and I got to sit down with 50 people and ask them to write $1 million checks. And it's for a good cause, but it's exhausting, you know? So I've never done that myself, but I can sense Paul being like, please don't make me come to your house and ask. It's so awkward.
Yeah. And as you're talking, you almost feel the difference in culture at that point too. It's like expectations of, hey, you're called to look back at your week and think about how much you're going to save.
And it's, I mean, this is normal human stuff, right? Like you work in an office, someone's like, hey, AJ's birthday is coming up. Like we'd love to pull in, give him a gift. When you're the person in charge of that and folks just drop the $20 on your desk and now you got $80 and you're like, I'm going to go buy him a birthday gift card or whatever. It's great. When you're like, nothing came in, now you got to go to cubicle and be like, hey, do you want to donate to AJ's? That's just awkward. Nobody wants to do that. So it's like, this is normal human stuff we're talking about. This is not weird church finance stuff. This is just when generosity moments take place in life, whether it's a birthday card or it's a capital campaign or it's an offering for the poor, it's always best when people out of their goodness of their hearts just decide to drop the money on your desk and you don't have to go cubicle to cubicle.
Yeah. So we get more insight into Paul's motivations for talking about this when he brings up in verse 3. Then when I arrive, I will give letters of introduction to the men you approve and send them with your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable for me to go also, they will accompany me. And so here we have the recipients of the gift here to Jerusalem. And so I want to put on my skeptic hat again because I'm pretty sure the church started in Jerusalem. And so it feels like, oh, give money to the mothership. You know, this is like the hub of Christianity. And so what can the context of both the Corinthian church and the church at Jerusalem at the time that this was written, how can that inform what Paul's trying to do here? Is he trying to get money toward the mothership of the church, or is something going on?
Yeah, I mean, you would have to be, we'd have to have a pretty large conspiracy theory for that to be the most logical thing that's happening, right? Because, and I say that because Paul is by title, the apostle to the Gentiles. And so it's like Peter kind of becomes the de facto senior pastor of the church network in Jerusalem. Paul is the one on the frontier bringing the gospel to the ends of the earth. And so if Paul is complicit in this thing of like getting money back to like the mothership, this is like some kind of like cult scam at that level where it's like, he's just out there collecting funds. He brings it back. He somehow gets a kickback, whatever it is, you know?
Yeah.
So there'd have to be like a grand layers of conspiracy for that to be the most likely answer. So that's why I say the most likely answer as we look at commentaries and kind of read through these passages. There's the Jewish folks Christians in Jerusalem. There's a lot of folks who have financial need. Corinth, if you look at kind of the geography of and kind of economy of that time, a major port city, trade city, probably a lot more wealthy people. Jerusalem was under kind of the hand of the Roman government and had to pay all these taxes and all these things. And so like most likely from reading the New Testament, it's like we've got a church in Corinth, like the Bay Area, a cosmopolitan area where there's a lot of wealth, where folks have excess. And then you got a place like Jerusalem where there's Christians who are going through a hard time and need some funds, and Paul's connecting the dots. And so I wouldn't be surprised if, 5 years later, we don't have this in our Bible and this didn't happen, but I wouldn't have been surprised if 5 years later, Paul's like, hey, just, I'm going to take an offering this time for the people in Ephesus, because they're going through a hard time. So yeah, most likely thing is not like grand pyramid scheme in my mind. Most likely thing is when we got these, as Paul's doing his travels, he's realizing there's a great need. Most of the church is still in Israel, right? It's new to have ministry here on the frontiers. So the greatest financial need is in the place where most Christians live, which still is in Jerusalem, then Judea, Samaria, then the uttermost part of the earth.
Yeah. And what fascinates me about this conversation is imagining first century Corinth. Like there's no newspaper, there's no television. You got this guy, Paul, coming in, preaching the gospel and saying, I've gone all over the world. I see where the need is. And he's almost facilitating this connection. And so I want to apply that to today's church, 21st century. We get a lot more coverage of what's going on. But I'm imagining you have a pretty distinct perception of the needs going on. And I wonder if you feel the same way about your role of saying, okay, I see the different needs. We see the different needs. Our church sees the different needs. And so we're really playing facilitation between receiving those needs and distributing those needs. So I'm wondering, what can you talk to the people about your perspective of where the different needs are as you see them at Three Crosses Church in the East Bay, however you want to take this conversation?
Yeah, I think what maps most on Paul's encounter here, it's funny, in our context, is usually the opposite of Paul's, where there's a tragedy in the world, and our people in our church are the ones like, hey, are we going to do anything as a church to help? Right. And so it's like we're seeing the devastation with the flooding in Guadalupe, Texas last month, and a number of people in our church is like, hey, is our church helping in any way, right? Because we have funds that we set aside intentionally in case folks are in need, mostly in our local community, but sometimes in our world. And so it's like, absolutely, right? And so we sent a check for, I think, $10,000 to Guadalupe, Texas, and not just put it in the mail to Guadalupe, Texas, but sent it to a partner, Convoy of Hope, who's on the ground in Guadalupe, bringing food, supplies, doing some funerals, all these beautiful things. And so it's, when people come to us and said, hey, we know there's a need, are we doing anything? It's not me like knocking on doors like I'm taking off an offering for Guadalupe. It's people have asked and people have already donated, and we've kind of done this passage already. We've put money aside, so if there are needs, we send it out, right? I had a call from a pastor, Ray Hudson in Berkeley. He leads City Center Church, it's a partner church of ours. He's a church planner out there. It's a great church, and man, had a tragedy a couple weeks ago. Somebody broke into their church. They're right there on College Avenue, broke the front window, came in, stole a bunch of their audio video equipment. It's like 3 days from Sunday. And I just said, hey, if there's anything we can do to help, we want to make sure you guys are live on Sunday. And so, they're working through insurance and all that, but we were able to give them some funds to help them bridge the gap, to make sure church can happen on Sunday. And so it's, hey, we've just said, hey, no problem. We've already set aside funds for folks who are in need. And so it's not like I'm knocking on people's doors asking for money to pass the hat to give to Ray. It's like, hey, this ministry has a need. Let's pass the funds along because we've already done what Paul has prescribed. We as a church have set aside money. And then there's other times where there's new stuff, that we don't know about that we're finding out from the field. So Mark Tyler is our missions pastor. He's in Tanzania right now with a group of 10. They're going through Tanzania, visiting from house to house, these different house church areas that have a lot of financial needs. And so he always brings finances with him in case he encounters people along the way who need a shirt to put on their back, who need a meal or a set of meals, or they need, he was able, I got some photos I can show you. We gave out, I think, 3 or 4 different motorbikes to these church planting pastors who are walking 8 hours a Sunday from church to church to church. We're like, we want you to be able to extend the ministry of the gospel. You're going to kill yourself walking this far every day to visit these churches. And so we give them some transportation, some gas money. And so we bring funds with us for folks who are in need. And then even here in the East Bay, most of our resources are not sent around the world or sent across the country. Most of our resources that we collect are invested in our primary mission, which is to transform the East Bay with the gospel of Jesus. And so every day we are extending some level of resources to building ministries to reach kids in the community, or through our student ministries, or to reach the community at large through like our ice skating rink or Bible studies, discipleship. We're trying to get onto school campuses. We've got all these visionary projects. And so that's one where it's like, we're looking for ways to impact the world for the gospel here in the East Bay. And folks just faithfully give to our church, and that becomes our budget. And yet from time to time, it's like, like I talk about on Sunday, it's if we're not making budget, we come before our church and just say, hey, we've got some plans on our heart to impact the world for the gospel this year. This is what it takes to do it. It relies on the generosity of God's people. And our hope is that as we present the need, God stirs in the heart of the people to meet the need, and we make budget and are able to do those things God's laid on our heart. And then other times we get these, we've got Vision Sunday, August 10th. We get these visions from the Lord of ways that we can make huge impact. And a lot of times those come with financial asks. And so it's never like, hey, like we want to pass the plate because Danny wants to buy a new pair of shoes or something, right? It's like,
right.
Hey, we have this passion to go and launch this ministry with these people down the street, or help this church in this time of need, or we need this facility to be able to do this type of ministry by this school or whatever it is. It's in the Bay Area. It's going to take $1 million to get this building or whatever it is. And so there are times where it's like, hey, if we're only going to do it if the church sees fit that this is worth our investment and they bring forth the funds, then we're going to invest those funds to reach the people. So we've been doing that here in this place in Castro Valley for 50 years, in the East Bay for 90 years. And really that's how our finances work, is that folks surrender their gifts to the Lord. And sometimes it's connected with a specific ask. Other times it's just, hey, use this however you can in ministry. And we steward those funds to make impact for the gospel wherever we go.
So before we move on from this text, verses 3 and 4, I'm struck by the appointment of different people to travel to Jerusalem. It's a far trip from Corinth to Jerusalem. And so they're carrying the gift to Jerusalem. And Paul is saying, if it seems advisable for me to go also, they will accompany me. So I'm thinking whoever these people are have got to be pretty passionate about what is happening here. And so I'm thinking of people in our congregation that have caught this vision, that are excited to hear all the different ways that financial contributions are contributing to the expansion of the kingdom in a lot of ways. And so I'm also struck by the word gift here, gift to Jerusalem. I don't know if we've been talking about spiritual gifts a lot, but this is the same book that we talked about spiritual gifts, 1 Corinthians 12. And it's a gift, charis, the Greek word there. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to people who feel like, man, it feels like the Spirit is giving me the gift of generosity. You look at Romans 12. It talks about the different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. And it says, if it is giving, then give generously. What would you say to the people that feel like there's something being born, like the gift of generosity in their heart?
And that's a beautiful thing, like any other spiritual gift. And I think it's important for us to recognize when we talk about spiritual gifts, so often we look at them like they're just mere abilities, right? So the gift of teaching is like, oh, you're able to teach, or the gift of helping, you're able to help. Gift of generosity, it's like, oh yeah, I'm able to help people because I got a bunch of money.
Yeah.
So that's not the best translation of or understanding of spiritual gifts. I would really encourage us all to look at the spiritual gifts more like ministries than abilities. And so, because I hear a lot of people like, oh yeah, I could never do that. I don't have the gift of compassion or teaching or whatever, or generosity.
People write off generosity really
quickly. I don't have that spiritual gift, But let's not forget, the spiritual gift is not the ability you have to write the check. The spiritual gift, in a sense, is the check. Like that is the gift that they're bringing to Jerusalem is funds. And so really the question when we talked about spiritual gifts a few months ago that I encouraged us to ask is really more along the lines of like, would God have me to bring a gift of generosity to this project, to these people, to this ministry, to this need? And so I would say instead of merely asking, do I have the gift of generosity, even if you're experiencing that stirring in your soul of like, man, I want to help, I want to be generous. It's like, that's awesome. But really that's the follow-up question is like, okay, well, what is the gift of generosity that God would have me to bring? And so is there a place that you would want to invest in ministry? Is there a place that you see need in the community that you can step into? Is it, I think part of the tension of generosity in the scriptures is it's not really about us. It's about the need. It's about the Spirit of God working through us. And so there's a lot of just a surrender. And so that's, when we look at generosity in the book of Acts, it's this idea that they liquidate their possessions and they lay them at the apostles' feet. It's this symbol of like, hey, use this however you need it. Like I want to make a great impact with this gift, but it's not like, hey, use this to buy a new carpet in the sanctuary, right? As much as it's like, hey, like I want to see God use this money. Could you use this money for God's work? And the apostles are humbly stewarding the funds saying, yeah, actually there's a big need for this. Let's use this. And so, I would say if you're sensing I've got this stirring in my heart towards generosity, I think first realize, okay, the gift is the generosity. And so what is the gift that God is calling you to give and in what direction? And I would just encourage you, like I'll say on Sunday, don't overthink it. Part of it is just surrendering your resources. And so even if it's just like, man, I remember when I was new to generosity, I just started taking the first 10% of my income and I just write a check to the church. Every time I got a paycheck, I would just pull out my checkbook and I'd move the decimal point over and I'd write a check and I'd put it in my wallet. Whenever I was at church, I'd put it in the plate, and then it's like, I want to do more. And so I'm like, all right, every time I go to the ATM, I'm going to take out $20 and I'm going to put it in my wallet and I'm going to fold it. And if I see someone who needs money, I'm going to give it to them. And whenever I spend it, I'm going back to the ATM, I'm getting a new $20, So I was always just looking for new ways to I just want to be more generous, because it's this contagious, even self-contagious practice. So yeah, I'd say don't overthink it. The best way to be generous is to give a gift of generosity. And I don't think you can really mess that up. I think we change our strategy over time. We refine our practices over time. We get passionate about different projects over time. But, I just think it's like anything else you want to grow in, just start doing it and see what the Lord opens doors towards in your life as you just start kind of flexing this muscle of generosity.
Yeah. And we were talking about how it just transforms you. Like just stepping into the practice transforms you. And, going back to passages like where your treasure is, their heart is also. Like there's a connection between your heart and your wallet. There's something about money that grabs our hearts in a lot of ways. And then in sermon review again, Nash brought up the passage in 2 Corinthians 8 of just how Jesus was rich, but he became poor so that we might become rich. And so aligning our hearts with the heart of Jesus through giving in a lot of senses. So
I know I've got our family, we've got folks, non-Christian folks, Catholic folks, Christian folks in my extended family. And I have a great aunt and uncle who passed away a long time ago, but they were famously poor. They lived in Hayward. They had this little house in Hayward. They had no kids, but they owned a toy store down on B Street in Hayward. And the reason they were poor is because every time little kids would come into their store, that this wasn't like a real affluent area back in the 50s, 60s, whenever it was. Anytime kids would come into their store who didn't have money to buy toys, they would just give them the toys. And so they always they survived.
Not good for business.
Not good for business, but it was just kind of their reputation. Even when I was a kid, they're 80 years old. Their reputation was, they're poor because they give all their stuff away. They own this toy store and they just give toys to poor kids. And it's they were fine. They never went on vacation. They never had a flashy house, whatever, but they lived in this little 1-bedroom house in Hayward for their whole lives. And I don't know. It's just that's cool. It just feels like none of us want to do that. We all want to become upwardly mobile with our wealth and all that, accumulate wealth. We want to do great things with our wealth. They just loved giving toys to kids, and they were almost irresponsibly non-concerned with the bottom line, but it worked for them, and they had zero bad reputation. We're oh yeah, these people, they're always mooching on everybody else. I don't know if they were believers or not, but God provided for them in a sense. And they were just generous people. And so the only thing I know about, this is the only story I know about these people. It's and that became their legacy. And so Paul ties that in 2 Corinthians to the legacy of Jesus. Hey, this is God himself, the richest entity in all of the universe. And yet he not only did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, he humbled himself, made himself nothing, Paul says in Philippians 2, and became poor is the interpretation in 2 Corinthians 8. And just laid it all out, gave everything so that we might become rich in Christ. And so he becomes our model for generosity.
It's just a beautiful picture. And it makes you wonder, what can we do? And so in your Bibles, if you're reading in the NIV, you might have a little section break, which is an artificial section break. Those section breaks were not in there.
It was just a letter.
Yeah. And so we transition from this conversation about money to seemingly Paul's travel plans. And so I'm going to read them, ask a couple questions, but I don't want to disconnect it from the conversation we're already having, because I do think it's placed there on purpose. And so verse 5, after I go through Macedonia, I will come to you, for I will be going through Macedonia. Perhaps I will stay with you for a while, or even spend the winter, so that you can help me on my journey wherever I go. For I do not want to see you now and make only a passing visit. I hope to spend some time with you, if the Lord permits. So a lot of skepticism, a lot of stuff going on here, I should say. When I was reading this, I was just okay, what's the plan here? And so I, of course, Googled a map of Paul's missionary journeys and saw that, he's in Ephesus at this point. We're going to learn in verse 8 that he's writing this in Ephesus. And so it's modern day Turkey, I believe. And to get to the city of Corinth, which is in modern day Greece, you either sail across the ocean or you just go north and then take that loop down. And so he's saying in Macedonia, he's going to take the long way and go all the way down. And so what I'm interested in here is he seems to have a lot of questions about what his plans are. And so he's saying things like, perhaps I'm going to stay, or I might even spend the winter there. I'm not sure. Wherever I go, I don't want to do this, but I really hope to do this. And so I'm wondering, with all this financial conversation, like a lot of the finances that I've seen, we try to use things very strategically. And yet here we have Paul saying, like, I kind of know what's going on. I have this desire. I feel like I want to do this, but I'm really not sure where this is going to go. So help us unpack that. What do you think Paul's strategy was as he was going around and as he was seeing different needs? Does that question make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was thinking that I'm hesitant to say this because it might not be true, but I'll say it. When I read this passage, the first thing that I saw was the humanity of Paul, who it feels like just from this little paragraph doesn't want to be locked down. Like there's this, he says, hey, we're going to send the money to Jerusalem with 2 people you appoint. And if it works out for me and for you, I'll accompany him if it works for my plans. Right. It's like, he's talking like a guy who doesn't want to be like locked into a plan. Like he wants to keep his options open. And then again, he does that here where it's like, hey, I'm not exactly sure, but if I come. So on one hand, I see the humanity of Paul, maybe the personality of Paul in here. The other hand, like this is Paul on these missionaries' journeys, just doing what the Spirit tells him to do. So there is a level, even as you read through Acts, where it's like he has plans to go to one city, and then he has this vision from this man in Macedonia specifically, who's like, come and help us, which is northern modern day Greece. And he goes to Macedonia. So he's also following the Spirit's leading. So it's kind of hard. You can't commit, right? Like Jesus or James says, like, don't say I'm going to do this or that tomorrow. Just say if it's God's will, I'm going to be alive and then I'll do this or that. So it's like he's leaving his plans open, maybe for the Lord, maybe because he doesn't like to be locked down. And yet he sets his intention where it's like, hey, don't be offended if I don't drop by on my way, through town. I would love to be able to spend some more time with you when I come. And so when I come, I want to hunker down for a while. So I'm thinking maybe this winter I can carve out more time, So he's giving a little bit of his intention that he doesn't want to just pass through. He'd love to do some ministry with them. Turns out when he gets there eventually, it's a pretty rough season. They got a lot of conflict that happens and it turns into a whole thing. So maybe the Holy Spirit was saying, like, you're going to need to spend some time with these people. But yeah, I see a little bit of the humanity of Paul, a little bit of the Spirit-led nature of Paul, and then a little bit of him just trying to be as clear as he can with the parameters he knows, right? They don't have like a train you can take. You're on ships and you have to abide by what the weather does if you're on a ship, or you go over land, you got to abide by what all these navigators help you do and all that. So it's like, he's walking from Turkey to southern Greece. So if he's taking land, so winter is maybe as specific as he could be, who knows, but it just seems like he's trying to be as clear as he can with the parameters that he knows, set expectations. It just feels very human to me.
So I guess this is where the bridge comes in between the two conversations, because I feel like in a lot of senses, this is sort of what I feel like in ministry a lot is like, well, I kind of am birthing this desire that I feel like the Spirit is leading me toward doing this. And I've experienced that in my life. And I can imagine the same is probably true with anybody on our staff. And yet snuck into this line is, I want to stay with you so that you can help me on my journey. So in a sense, he's asking for help in a ministry vision that seems to be like half baked, I suppose. And so I feel like there's a mutual trust going on between the people that are going to support him and, hey, we believe that this guy is going to do some good things based on what his vision is. So do you have anything to put into that conversation? Like, I mean, what do you feel like in terms of people who are giving the money in the congregation and then the people that are acting upon the vision of the church, like pastors or something like that?
Yeah, I think the first paragraph we talked about, sending this money to Jerusalem, is a good picture of when we pool our resources and send them to a place in need outside of ourselves. This is a good little picture of he's asking folks in the church to support him, right? So earlier in the book, he's like, I didn't take a salary. I didn't do any of those things. But it's like, he's being realistic. Hey, if I come, I want to come for a while. I'm not from there. I need a place to stay. I need food to eat. I'm going to need some, resources to live in this place. Like, and so it is this kind of a reminder that in order for them to exist in ministry, it does take generosity for these people that they're supporting, And that's why it's, when we talk to folks about finances here at the church, a lot of times those questions come up like, oh, well, this money comes in, you pay this staff, all those kinds of things. And that's totally true. I think we have a pretty average amount of the percentage of our budget goes towards staffing costs as churches go. We want to steward that money well, but that is what church has always been. Like even in the Old Testament, it's this idea that like we really value worship of God. We value it so much that we're going to invite some people to step out of their day jobs. The Levites in the Old Testament, the apostles here, right? And they're going to make a living by serving the church full time. And so he's coming to Greece, to southern Greece, Acacia, Corinth. He's coming to Corinth on a work trip, right? He's coming to serve them, share the gospel, do ministry, coach them, teach them theology. He's going to be working full time. He's already said, I'm not going to take a paycheck for that, but it's like he needs room and board. He needs some food, right? And so it's just a reminder that when people are called out of industry to step into ministry, the only way that works is because the local body supports them financially. And so whether that's pastors and ministry leaders here, or that's missionaries we send overseas, it's like, that's part of the whole thing is like, we value this work and we value it so much that we're going to ask folks to quit their jobs and just devote their lives to it. And we're going to help fund that. And so you see a little bit of a glimpse of that there where I want to come, I want to do ministry with you. Obviously that's going to be a financial cost to them. They're going to have to provide for him because he's a human. He's got to eat 3 meals a day or one or however many people ate back then. Needs a bed to sleep on, all that kind of stuff. So there's going to be a cost incurred there too.
Yeah. So I'm starting to see all the different financial costs to just ministry in general, where we talked about at the beginning of asking for money for other people that are struggling. And yet in order to have somebody minister, there needs to be some modicum of sacrifice there too, of room, board, housing, all these different things. So that's super interesting that is happening even back in the first century where, Paul wants to go and minister to these people and he needs help. And so I'm wondering, what do you say to the Three Crosses people out there that give financially, and how that supports people like you and me that are on staff full-time, have quit their pursuits or day jobs or whatever it is to be a full-time minister here?
Yeah. I mean, I think really it's one of those don't overthink it things. Like the beautiful ministry that happens here is a result of the generosity of God's people. Yeah. So it's like
this podcast doesn't exist without you guys.
Yeah, exactly. It's like yeah. And we, one of the things that we spend less on than the average church is what they call like program supplies. So we're not a church that has a bunch of flashy tech. We really work to steward our funds well. And yet it's like we were in a conversation with our board on Monday night of this week, which we just said, man, God is doing such a revival among the youth of the world, right? We just saw these statistics coming out of the UK where the next generation had like a double-digit increase in percentage of people who are interested in spiritual things and following Jesus. We're seeing that here too. And the board's like, man, we got to make sure that we're investing our resources in student ministries. And we're like, we are, right? But what that means is practically that we're going to make some phone calls, right? We called Nash Manker down in San Diego. We're going to call, like Austin Payne, like where he was at. We're going to call Lauren Corbis when she was at her day job and just be like, hey, we got this need to reach kids. Would you be interested in quitting your day job to come here and serve full-time at the church? We just want to reach student ministries. And behind the scenes, we want to reach students. Behind the scenes, the reason we can make that phone call is because people have surrendered resources to the church and said, hey, we want to transform the East Bay. We're very clear all the time. Our priority is the next generation. So we're not like trying to trick people or anything. It's like, but that's how we do it, is that, it's not like we just go buy pizzas for the next generation. We invest in lives for the next generation, like we see in the scriptures, and just say like, hey, is there anyone that God is calling to invest their life in this thing? Let's figure it out. And as we walk through those conversations, it's all the same stuff. It's like, you call someone who lives in a different city or state. Hey, would you be willing to come up here and invest your life in the next generation? Hey, where am I going to live? Is there a place to live? How am I going to afford rent? Like, what's the pay, right? All these normal questions, if you've applied for a job anywhere, come up because it's like, I love it. I love students. I feel called to reach students. I got to support my wife and kids, or I got to support myself, or whatever it is. So is it going to work out? And so, we always work hard. Our general principle is to compensate on the generous side of fair for ministry workers in this region. And so it's like, yeah, we're not paying our people what they're getting paid to work at Google or whatever.
Sure,
It's like we're probably paid like public school teachers. But really, it's like we look at other churches that are similar to ours in regions similar to ours around this country and just say, hey, we're going to, this is what churches pay for roles like this, right? And so it's not rocket science, but it's like, yeah, no one's getting rich doing this. But at the same time, like just like Paul, there's this like just common sense. Hey, if you're going to move up here, you're going to need a bed to sleep in. If you move up here, you're going to need food to eat, right? And so we're going to, as your employer in that sense, or your church, we're going to have to support you financially, right? And this is, it takes different forms in different seasons, right? And if you've been around for decades in America, right, there's seasons where churches all had parsonages and their pastor would live in a house the church would build for them. They would give them a stipend to kind of buy food and those kinds of things, right? It's like, that's the spirit of the whole thing is like, hey, we as a church are going to support you financially like a missionary in our city. And so your job, you don't have to worry about, working at Starbucks. Your job is to just reach these students. That's what we're inviting you to do. And we love that so much. We want to invest in that. And so, like I said, we pay about, an average percentage of our budget. I think it's about 50 to 60% of our total giving or spending goes towards staffing, which is pretty average for churches. And yet, we love investing in these places that God has called us to reach, and staffing is a part of that.
Yeah, and I think that's so hard to remember at times because it feels like, oh, those are the professionals doing their thing because we're paying them to do it. And yet, like, I think that's where the fellowship of all of this comes to play because we're doing it together in a lot of senses. Like, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for people out there supporting us. And so, like,
and it's interesting. The Bay is an interesting place too, because most families here in the Bay, it's like it takes two incomes to live in the Bay.
Right.
And so it's, I think maybe, a couple generations ago or a generation ago, it's kind of like, well, at the church, it's like, oh yeah, I'll just work part-time at Starbucks. And then, we've had conversations with people here at our church about that. Hey, I've got a part-time job at Starbucks. I'm just going to volunteer at the church the rest of my time. We've had people come and say like, hey, I just can't do that anymore. I can't work part-time. My spouse and I both have to work full-time to pay our rent. And so, we do everything we can to mobilize volunteers into the ministry as much as possible. And yet, even our staffing strategy has changed in light of that, where it's like when we bring in staff, they're not just going to be these individual people going and reaching people. They're going to help mobilize, train, equip, deploy volunteers because we want to do this, be an army, God's army in this place, not just these all-stars like Lauren or whoever, we want to be teams. And so, that's part of how we lived in that tension of like, we want to be the whole church doing the work of the ministry, but we need to invest in men and women who can leave their day jobs and devote their time to equipping people for that work and deploying those volunteers into that work.
You had mentioned the 50 to 60% towards staffing, and you had said that's sort of close to the national average. Is there anything else that stands out for the rest of the 40 to 50% that, that you would like to share with the audience here?
Yeah, I think that, when I said look at our kind of, if you look at a pie chart of what we invest resources in at the church, we've got a varied budget, right? We have a general fund budget that's the lion's share of all of our ministry investment, supports everything we do here in the East Bay. We've got a couple of designated funds. We have a building fund, and we've got a missions fund. We also have always have money kind of stored away in a benevolence fund in case folks have needs. We want to make sure there's money there for them. We always make sure there's money in the scholarships, all that kind of stuff. So kind of as I look at that whole pie, I would guess last year, I don't have the numbers on my fingertips here, but we probably invested about $10 million in ministry last year, which is unbelievable. Wow. $2 million of those dollars were invested in global missions. And so that's kind of, I would think the biggest striking area where we invest more than the average church is 20% of our total investment went into God's global gospel last year, which is awesome. Yeah. We even have a nonprofit that we've utilized to raise more money for God's global gospel. So 20% of our resources go to the missions field. The other place is pretty stark. We have no debt, and we've always worked really hard to, anytime we do a building project, pay it off as we go. And so a lot of churches are encumbered by debt. We have no debt. So that's a remarkable place where it's lower, which has allowed us to kind of move towards that You don't know how much of the 10 million, like 50 to 60% of that goes towards staffing, because we've just said, you know what, let's not invest in more stuff. Let's invest in workers in the ministry. And so, the rest of the percentages are pretty boilerplate. I don't know what they are exactly, but whatever, 10, 15% of it is buildings, grounds, facilities, upkeep, all that kind of stuff. We store money away towards future building projects and all of that. But I think I'm struck by the real faithful stewardship we have with ministry supplies. I'm struck with how much we give towards global missions. I'm struck with how much we give towards scholarships. We have multiple layers of scholarships for all of our, especially our next generation camping. So it's like financial reasons are never a reason not to go to camp. If you're new, if you're not a believer, if you're not a church person, we'll almost pay the entire thing for you to go to camp. It's like we have all these scholarships. We give out tens of thousands of dollars in scholarships every year just because we want to reach the next generation. So we steward that pie to really say what's going to make the maximum impact with our dollars for the kingdom. And so it's like we see impact around the world, so we invest around the world. We see impact raising up men and women on our staff and sending them out and training them up in ministry. So we're going to invest in our staff. We see impact in helping kids get to camp who couldn't get there otherwise. We invest in that. We see impact in helping the poor, so we make sure we have funds for that. We see impact in stewarding this facility, so we make sure that we kind of take those percentages and make sure we have it so that we don't have to incur debt if we build a new building. So I think for us, that's kind of like how the pie works. And it's not, part of the reason I'm having a trouble bringing up all the exact numbers is like, it's not an exact science. It's a stewardship, right? It's really the beginning of the year. We're not a business. We don't have like a revenue stream. So it's, we just say, man, I sense the Lord is calling us to do these things this year. Feels like here in the Bay, this is what that's going to cost. We go to our board and say, hey, would we approve a budget this year of, we have a $7.2 million general fund budget approved for this year with an additional kind of dream of $300,000 extra towards some vision we'll talk about on August 10th for this year alone. And just say, man, we're just going to trust the Lord will bring in this money. And then in addition to that, it's like, anything that comes in for missions goes out. That's $2 million last year. Anything that comes in a building, we save here. And so, last year it ended up us being outlaying around $10 million, I think. And it's all just, money. We're a nonprofit. So what that means is everything that comes in, we invest back out again. And so we try to invest strategically in these areas that are most important to us.
Yeah. And again, I think this could be so hard for people because these are big numbers. Like these are large numbers. And
the crazy thing though, I'll say this, they're huge numbers. It's like, can't even understand that. It's like, we've been here 50 years in Castro Valley. We got a 20-acre campus. We repave the parking lot. It's tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's big numbers.
Right. It's a big parking lot.
It's a big parking lot. At the same time, when we look at our church, we've got a lot of our giving is relatively small amounts. Folks who are new to church, throwing some money in the plate here and there, giving a few hundred or a few thousand, right? So it starts to get a little more substantial. We got kind of this bread and butter number of real faithful folks who give a tithe of their income. So 10% of their income to the local church. And so now we've got, if the average household income here in the East Bay is $80,000, right? So we've got a bunch of gifts around that $8,000 a year range of folks who are just, I want to tithe my money. And then we got some folks who are just like, you talk about this gift of generosity and they just go above and beyond. And so, I think about 25% of our total budget comes through large scale gifts. 75% give through normal gifts, people tithing or just giving. And so it is a lot of money, but the lion's share of the funds that come in are folks just faithfully writing a check of either 10% of their income or a few $100s or, this or that. There's nothing we do. We make money. We don't rely on business revenue.
Right.
It's really just folks give. And so we just feel overwhelmed with gratitude and responsibility to steward the resources that come in and say, okay, what are we going to do to invest this in God's kingdom? Because we're very clear. Our vision is to transform the East Bay with the gospel. That's what we're going to spend the money on. We're not going to spend it on new cars for people or whatever. It's like, we're going to spend the money on transforming the East Bay with the gospel. And we hope you don't mind. Sometimes it goes around the world to transform the world with the gospel, but this is our primary focus, our mission field.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple of things that are percolating in my mind right now. One, just the incredible faithfulness of you guys out there who have been at Three Crosses for a while, or just are stepping into community or our ministry and beginning to give. Just incredible gratitude for you guys out there. And yet you've mentioned a couple times now that August 10th, we're going to have a Vision Sunday. And so if you're out there, invite your friends, invite your family, bring as many people, associated with Three Crosses, because it's going to be an exciting time. And I think I want to end it there because it seems like Paul's really excited about the ministry right in front of him. And so he says, I've been talking about going through Macedonia to get to you guys, but I'm going to stay at Ephesus until Pentecost, because a great door for effective work has opened to me, and there are many who oppose me. So what would you say to people that are, again, there's something bubbling, they're ready, maybe they got their wallets out or their checkbooks. What would you say is the state of ministry right now? Because I can see people putting in or plugging in the East Bay, because it feels like there's some great doors for effective ministry work opened right now. And there seems to be a lot of people that oppose what's going on right now. So
yeah, and it's funny. It's so interesting that he uses both of those in the same sentence. Like, I can't wait to be at Ephesus. There's tons of people who oppose me there. It's like, wait, what? And yes, I think the reputation of the Bay is there's tons of folks who oppose us here, and I've heard stories like that this week. But I do think, to Paul's point in this passage and to our point here, there is a great door of effective ministry happening here in the Bay Area. I was sitting down with 8 different Bay Area pastors from around the Bay a couple of weeks ago for lunch, and we're just kind of talking about the state of Christianity in the Bay. And someone's like, man, I feel like this is just a season of revival almost that we've never seen before. And another guy said, hey, can I ask a question? Like, how many of you had the largest Sunday in your church's history on Easter Sunday this year? Every single pastor around the table raised their hand. And these are churches that have been around for, 90 years, 120 years, and churches that have been around for a long, long time, some newer churches too. It's like every single church is like, we've never had what's happening right now. And so, even at our board meeting on Monday night, we're looking at the finances. It's like, well, okay, we're moving into the third quarter this year. We're hoping that our budget picks up because we're praying that we can make this $7.5 million budget by December. We're about 37 of the way to our budget as 50% of the year has gone by. And so we want to see God stir in the hearts of the people to bring in more resources. But really the tension is like, we're doing a lot of great ministry. It's like folks are coming to Christ. Folks are changing their lives. Folks are meeting Jesus for the first time. Kids are being transformed at camp. We're helping kids get there with scholarships. We heard some stories today at our staff meeting that the majority of kids who went for the first time, non-believing kids on scholarship, ended up making these first-time decisions for Christ at camp. It's like, that's what we're all about. Now it's like, now we're just trusting that the funds come in to help pay for this thing because this is amazing. And so it's like ministry is increasing. And so that's part of the reason that our budget is increasing. And yet we're just trusting that the faithfulness of God goes before us and the people are stirred in their hearts to give. And so if you come to Vision Sunday, don't be deceived. It's not going to be like a come and I'm going to ask you for money Sunday. And so if you want to bring friends. If somebody hasn't been to church in a long time, bring them. Really, we're primarily going to talk about just a sense that we have as a leadership of what God's inviting us into in the next decade of ministry. And so some brand new things we've never done before. Really felt like, let's share this with our whole church. This is really exciting stuff. And I'm going to work hard. On one hand, we're going to ask folks on that Vision Sunday, hey, who's interested in hearing more about this vision? Who might be interested in giving towards this vision? But it is not going to feel like a big financial ask Sunday. I think I'll just tell you right now, kind of the vibe that we're trying to bring to that Sunday is, here's the vision. Really, a lot of this vision can be funded through our budget this year. So we've already talked about that this Sunday. And yet, if you're at a spot, right? And if you're in a spot listening today where you've got extra resources or you feel God stirring in your heart to give generously to what this vision is, we can receive gifts towards this. This is something that, I'm realizing, we've got this vision to see a lot of great ministry happen in the Bay in the next 10 years. It's going to require financial resources. And in a sense, we're going to be able to move at the speed of those resources. And so if somebody came and said, hey, I got $50,000 or hey, I got $2 million or whatever, name the amount. We'd be like, we could use that. Like, we actually have channels to outlay those resources in really effective ways to reach tons of people. And so, I'm super excited. It's not going to be a real money heavy talk. We're going to talk a little bit about vision. Some of the funding behind the vision later in the year as those things crystallize. Right now, it's really just want to share kind of the high level. This is where God's inviting us to go. It's real in line with our past, but it's really fresh and new for our future too. So don't miss Sunday, August 10th.
Get excited. There's a lot of doors for effective ministry work.
And I will say too, we're asking folks, if you're part of our church, listen to our podcast, come at 8:30 if you can. We want you to hear first. And we'd also love to create space at our 10 o'clock for folks who are new to church and all that. But can't wait for that Sunday.
There you go. I knew this conversation would be great. Every time I talk to you about finances, I learned something new. So I appreciate it, Pastor Danny. And we'll see you next week.
See you next week.